The picture that you see is one of the last pictures taken during the British Mount Everest expedition of 1924. Among climbers, the names of George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine will be remembered for eternity in the myths of the mountain. However, it piqued everyone's interest. What happened during the 30th of June in the year 1924? Did these climbers reach the top of the mountain or not? Or did the mountain, in all its merciless glory, claim their lives before they could reach the top? This is the chilling mystery of Mallory and Irvine. It's the story of a death which still echoes in the mountains of the Himalayas. The year 1924 was a year of exploration. Everyone was pushing past the boundaries of imagination. George Mallory was one such man who had attempted Everest, and this time he and his team were sure they would be successful. The spirit of the age is captured in Mallory's now famous answer as to why he wanted to climb Mount Everest: because it's there. With him as his climbing partner was Andrew Irvine, a young man who was considered to be well-trained with the new techniques of oxygen equipment which was developed at that time and they thought would make their journey successful. Together, they made the ultimate attempt to conquer the summit of Everest. It was June 8, 1924, when Mallory and Irvine were last seen alive. Noel Odell, their other fellow climber, noticed via a momentary clearing through the clouds and saw two tiny dots of people climbing what he believed to be the second step, known to be part of the extremely hard-to-climb North Ridge of Everest. The two men appeared to be within striking distance of the summit, tantalizingly close to achieving what no human had ever done before. And then, without warning, they disappeared into the mist. The clouds closed in around them, and Odell's view was lost. Mallory and Irvine were never seen alive again. What happened next is still shrouded in controversy, thus making it one of the biggest controversies that are associated with mountaineering. Did they struggle further up, suffering from fatigue, freezing temperature and low oxygen, only to die on the way down? Or did something go horribly wrong to them before the top was even visible? The mountain did not let anyone go through this experience uncharted. The only observer to their fate was Everest. Day after day, the rescue was conducted, but Mallory and Irvine were lost in the boundless snowy desert. Since there were no remains, no evidence, and no explanations as to what might have happened to them, their case turned into a myth. This photo, which was taken by their team, depicts the area which they probably traversed till the time they were killed. A single line in the snow to continue further in hope for a positive end, up to the top. Was this trail good for them leading to victory, or did it take them to their downfall? The picture recreates the climate of solitude on the mountains, above where even the strongest can be brought to their knees by the sheer power of the mountain. This single set of footprints is a chilling reminder of how alone they were, marching onward into the unknown. Days turned to weeks without anyone hearing from the missing climbers. Thus, the 1924 British expedition was over, filled with sadness and doubts, and everyone supposed the climbers had fallen somewhere on the mountain or been killed by the severe climate. But again, there was nobody to give the world the confirmation that such people had died for sure. Did they, against all odds, reach the summit of Everest before meeting their tragic end? There were many hypotheses, but as time ran on, they had no ways to prove that, so the mystery grew deeper with time. This was an actual historical story that remained a mystery for 70 years. The climbers who attempted the summit in later years looked for any sign of the two lost mountaineers among the mountain ridges. Their names were as famous as the mountain itself, and with every new expedition, there was a hope that they'd be found one day. Every rock, every crevice held the potential to reveal the final resting place of Mallory and Irvine. The mountain, however, remained silent, keeping its deadly secrets well hidden. Then, in 1999, the American expedition led by Conrad Anker made a shocking discovery. On the desolate slopes of Everest, George Mallory's body was found. Lying with his face down on the snow, at which he was quite frozen and perfectly preserved by the thick layer of fresh ice, Mallory's arms were spread out, as if he had been attempting to break a fall. Although seeing his remains after almost 3/4 of a century was quite disturbing, as well as heartrending. After many years, he had been exposed to harsh weather conditions, and yet his body was rather well preserved, as if the mountain had mummified him. Lying close to Mallory's frozen body, the climbers discovered such items as handkerchiefs, watch, and goggles with monograms on them. But the most important item, the one that could have solved the mystery once and for all, was missing: his camera. Mallory and Irvine had taken with them a Kodak camera all the time. However, no camera or the body of Andrew Irvine was recovered from Everest. But even after the discovery of Mallory, this was far from being the end of the mystery. In 1933, an ice axe was found on the route at 27,750 feet. It had 3 nick marks on it, which was the characteristic mark Irvine was known to have put on some of his belongings. Apart from it, nothing related to Irvine has ever been found, despite many expeditions trying to locate the body of the missing man. It is said that his remains, along with the camera, is still buried somewhere in the upper slopes of Mount Everest. Over the years, climbers have reported seeing scattered remnants of old oxygen cylinders and equipment from the 1924 expedition, but no definitive trace of Irvine himself. Did he fall to his death? Was he buried by an avalanche? The answers remain elusive, as Everest continues to guard the final chapter of their story. There cannot be a better and effective lesson of how dangerous Everest is than the tragic tale of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. To some people, it symbolizes the greatest test, the culmination of man's physical fitness. However, the mountain has no care for the dream and existence of those people who wish to conquer it. As to whether Mallory and Irvine got to the top first, it is now an open question that can never be answered. Whether Mallory and Irvine reached the summit first will likely never be known. What is certain, however, is that they became legends, not for their success, but for their disappearance into the heart of Everest's mysteries. In the early years of the 20th century, when the world was struggling to recover from the Great Depression, J.P. Morgan, with his financial empire controlling the world, and an unexpected photograph came out on the headlines. This picture depicts a scene which, in the first instance, may seem rather innocent. J.P. Morgan Jr., one of the richest men in the world, is presented relaxed on a chair with a woman in her 20s, Liia Graph, sitting on his lap. She flashes a smile at the group of photographers, but deep down there is so much more than what meets the eye. Behind her bright smile lies poverty, violation, grief, and despair. Liia Graph was not an ordinary woman. She was a performer, circus freak to be precise, who had been paraded in front of the audiences due to her dwarfism. Growing up in a world where individuals with differences were overlooked and commodified, Graph, for the most part, became a mere spectacle for the public's entertainment, a life that by today's standards feels disturbingly exploitative. But such practices were not rare back in the 1930s and 1940s. Lori Graph was performing in the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, which is the same establishment that celebrated the so-called freak shows and turned physically challenged men and women into stars. Though it made them famous, but the fame came at a cost. J.P. Morgan Jr. was one of the wealthiest and most powerful Morgans in the country, who was depicted as rude in business issues, but wasn't averse to showing emotions in public. This photograph was taken in the framework of such a PR campaign, as a part of which Morgan tried to present himself as a man who has empathy, who was close to the common people. Still, in this case, the act which was captured on the photograph was rather questionable. Affection combined with exploitation. Graph is an internationally known performer. For Liia Graph, this moment in the spotlight, seemingly playful and innocent, would mark one of the last moments of her public success before her world would come crashing down. Liia Graph had faced adversity her entire life. Standing at less than 4 feet tall, she was no stranger to the cruel stares and remarks from society, but her career in the circus offered her a way to make a living, albeit at the cost of her dignity. Despite the veneer of fame, she was subject to constant ridicule. People would pay to see her perform, but they also paid to mock her existence, to treat her as an object of curiosity rather than a human being. This was a time when freak shows were considered mainstream entertainment, and performers like Graph were often dehumanized for profit. The photograph with J.P. Morgan was taken in 1933, during a time of intense financial and social upheaval. The Great Depression had devastated economies worldwide, and even figures like Morgan were attempting to restore public confidence. The moment was carefully staged. Morgan, the embodiment of financial power, sitting with Liia Graph, a woman who, in many ways, represented the marginalized and powerless. The contrast was stark and intentional, a demonstration of the social hierarchies that defined the time. The contrast of these two figures, the one at the top of society and the latter at the bottom, reflects the hardships of those who were used for people's amusement and then cast aside once they became redundant. Tragically, like many others, Graph was a victim of the brutality of the Nazi regime. Her fame as a circus performer did little to protect her from the growing wave of anti-Semitism that swept across Europe. Having relatives in the international circus and the fame she received in the United States, she was arrested by the Nazis at some point. She was deported, and in 1941, she passed away in Auschwitz with her family in a gas chamber. A tragic end for a woman who had spent her life trying to navigate a world that alternately celebrated and ridiculed her for her differences. Far worse, though, is that Graph's life, as that of a number of others, became entangled in the crisis of the world. The Holocaust caused the death of millions of people, and Liia Graph is one of the many individuals who perished in the Holocaust, but her story is long forgotten by history. All her glories, her fame as a circus performer, and her 5 minutes with J.P. Morgan, they all were worthless when it came to facing the genocidal Nazi regime. The world that used to admire her singularity just turned the other way and ignored her pain. Today, the photo of J.P. Morgan and Liia Graph may be viewed in several different ways. It is no longer merely a photograph of another time, but a relic from a time when the world was divided and different people were treated differently. It indeed reminds one of Grove's Strickland's fate as a cautionary tale of the tragic fallacy of fame and glamour, always hidden behind the shadows of history, telling those left behind to suffer the brunt of society's inhumanity. In the rugged terrain of Washington's Cascade Range, nestled among towering trees and rocky slopes, a man sits with a smile on his face. His name is David A. Johnston, and he was one of the brightest volcanologists of his generation. This is Johnston, depicted at a time when he was to record one of the greatest natural calamities to happen on American land, the eruption of Mount St. Helens. What this picture does not show yet is the horrible grim end that he met right after this moment. Johnston was to soon join the list of 57 victims who were to be taken by the wrath of the volcano on the ill-fated day in the year 1980. David A. Johnston was born in 1949 in Chicago, and since his early years, Johnston showed interest in the planet's geology, especially the occurrence of volcanoes. He successfully continued his education and obtained his degree in geology from the University of Illinois, and later on he went to the University of Washington to do his PhD in volcanology. Over time, Johnston developed a passion for great forces beneath Earth and devoted himself to the study of volcanoes, and particularly prevention of eruptions, to save people's lives. The eruptions of Mount St. Helens had started to rise in March of 1980. Johnston, employed by the USGS, studied the rise and moving frequency of seismic and volcanic activators sent to the site. The mountain, dormant for more than a century, had suddenly roared back to life. Johnston and each of his associates realized the importance of the tremors and the gas emanations, concluding that an eruption of the stratovolcano was possibly close at hand. Little did they know, the most violent eruption in U.S. history was only days away. Johnston was positioned at a watching station called Coldwater 2 Observation Position, which is situated 6 miles north of the volcano. His duty was to watch for such signs as the emergence of a large lump on the northern side of the mountain, which in fact was magma pushing its way up. It was just like any other night of the year, May 17, 1980, for Johnston. He and his colleagues at USGS were in constant communication, meticulously tracking every tremor and plume of steam. The eruption, they thought, was likely still days away. Johnston stayed up late at his observation post, recording data and updating his notes. He was aware of the risks, but the sheer scale of the disaster that was about to unfold was unimaginable. Then, the morning of May 18th, at exactly 8:32 a.m., something happened that would turn everything upside down. A massive earthquake that measures 5.1 shook the ground beneath Mount St. Helens. The northern side of the mountain, which had been steadily bulging for weeks, suddenly gave way in a massive landslide, the largest in recorded history. The collapse triggered a lateral blast, a phenomenon that volcanologists had assumed but never seen on this kind of scale. Johnston was the only one who was the first to notice what was going on. When the mountains started to crumble, he rushed to the USGS headquarters, located in Vancouver, Washington, to report the situation. His final words, transmitted over the radio, were chilling. "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it." Those would be the last words that anyone ever got to hear from David Johnston before his death. In less than a couple of minutes, the lateral blast was racing at over 300 miles per hour and devoured all in its way. The force of the blast threw hot cinders, gas, and debris skywards, flattening trees and burning all that was in a 230 square mile radius. The Coldwater 2 observation post, where Johnston had been standing, was directly in the path of destruction. The blast was so powerful that it obliterated the landscape, reducing forests to matchsticks and sending plumes of ash and debris as high as 15 miles into the atmosphere. Johnston, along with his equipment, was swept away by the pyroclastic flow. His remains were never discovered. However, parts of his equipment were found to have plummeted to the ground, hidden under layers of ashes. The force of the eruption had been so immense that it erased nearly all traces of the man who had dedicated his life to studying it. The loss of David Johnston was a big blow in society, particularly to the science community. He was so much more than just an expert in volcanology. He was one of nature's pioneers, one of the people who dedicated their entire lives and careers to studying and deciphering the mysteries of volcanic activity to protect others. His work prior to the eruption of Mount St. Helens helped shape the current methods of monitoring extinct volcanoes, and his learning has no doubt provided the source of preventing the loss of numerous lives in the years to come. That is where the tragedy of Johnston's narrative lies, not in his death, but it's in the sheer unpredictability and power of nature. Regardless, Johnston was as brilliant as could be, and the scientific community as ready as it could be. The eruption of Mount St. Helens proved that nature is still uncontrollable. Despite all the technology, data, and experience, Johnston and his colleagues were caught off guard by the sheer scale of the eruption. It was a humbling and terrifying realization. In the aftermath of the disaster, Johnston's name became synonymous with dedication and sacrifice in the face of unimaginable danger. The observation post where he spent his final moments was later renamed the Johnston Ridge Observatory in his honor. It stands as a testament not only to his work, but to the unpredictable and awe-inspiring power of the Earth itself. What makes David Johnston's story so terrifying is the contrast between what was happening beneath the surface of the Earth, an eruption, and what was occurring in the calm demeanor he had in the picture. In the picture where he sits on a folding chair with a smile on his face and a notebook in his hand, giving the impression of a man who is satisfied in what he's doing and least expectant of events that are soon to follow. For many, it serves as a reminder of the fleeting nature of life and how easily and often it can be taken from us. Today, while focusing on Johnston's great achievements, we should not forget about the lessons he provided us with. His work today is still helping people monitor active volcanoes all around the world, and his story is a history of people disregarding the force of nature.